No, he didn't say that, Dave. I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Labour Party has begun its war on justice in a new review of the court system led by, of all people, the freedom-hating Sir Brian Leveson. And with nothing off the table, a fundamental right to trial by jury could be removed for some offences. Having said that, for about 15 minutes, I will be supporting the Labour Party as it gets some things right. Find out why shortly, but make sure you're sitting down. The PM has committed an additional £13 million to a dodgy UN agency, the same agency that fired 9 of its staff after discovering they may have been involved in the 7th of October attacks by Hamas. Does this use of foreign aid, your money, make any sense? Plus, the State of the Nation book club returns in epic fashion. An heir to the Habsburg throne and Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See, Edward von Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, joins me to discuss his new book, Building a Wholesome Family. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most intellectual panel, journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman, and senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, Richard Johnson. As ever, let me know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the news bulletin, with... It's disappeared. Well, it's... name.
No worries, Jacob. Plenty of times I've been forgotten. At 8 o'clock, let's give you your top story. The government will not change the terrorist status of the rebels which toppled the Syrian regime. Speaking after an emergency Cobra meeting, Defence Secretary John Healey said the government is laser-focused on stopping a resurgence of terror groups like ISIS in the Middle East. But now is not the time to consider removing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the proscribed terror list.
Conscription is not a matter for now. It doesn't stop us talking to all the parties, and our interest in HTS is that they live up to their promises to protect the rights of all individuals and all groups, to respect international law, and to prevent Syria becoming a base for fresh terrorist threats.
And in other news, a body has been found in the search for missing former England rugby player Tom Boyce. It's feared the 43-year-old was swept away while trying to cross a flooded river on Saturday night during Storm Dara. It is believed Mr Voice had entered the river near Alnwick after attempting to cross Aberwick Ford in his car. Northumbria Police's Marine Unit discovered a body earlier today. Chief Superintendent Helena Barron said the development was extremely sad. In the NHS, the number of hospital beds in England occupied by patients with flu has increased by 70% in a week, according to NHS England, as it warns of a tidal wave of flu hitting hospitals. Leaders are warning hospitals are bracing for a so-called quademic of disease over the winter months, with an increase in cases of flu and expected increases in COVID-19. The government is today demanding immediate mandatory housing targets from councils as part of its plan to build 1.5 million houses by the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer is vowing to override blockers and put builders first as he prepares to unveil sweeping changes to the planning process. The new plans could mean increased developments on the Green Belt, though the government has pledged to prioritise brownfield sites. A man who tried to set fire to a hotel housing asylum seekers has been jailed for 9 years. That's the joint longest prison sentence in connection with the UK's summer of riots. Levi Fishlock smashed windows and stoked a flaming bin at Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham during a spate of disorder on the 4th of August. The 31-year-old initially denied violent disorder and arson with intent to endanger life, but later pleaded guilty to charges. Fishlock's sentence includes a 5-year licence period. Afterwards, he's released from jail. And finally, Duncan Norvell has died, aged 66. Hailed as one of the last legends of true variety comedy, the entertainer known for the catchphrase "Chase Me" died in hospital, surrounded by his loved ones on Thursday after a chest infection. We've got some pictures of Duncan Norvell that we'll give to you a little bit later from when Duncan appeared on Lee Anderson's programme on GB News. Those are your latest for now. Back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. 3 of the 4 pillars of the Constitution are under attack. The recent budget seeks to destroy property ownership, freedom of speech seems at daily risk, and now the rule of law is in the firing line as the government looks to restrict trial by jury. Determining innocence or guilt by a jury trial is an essential defence of freedom. The police, prosecutors and judges are all in the pay of the state, influenced by the culture of officialdom and led by members of the establishment. Starmer has good reason to dislike juries, for they humiliated him when he prosecuted 32 journalists as the Director of Public Prosecutions for the crime of receiving information from officials. Juries found them not guilty, and the final cases collapsed. But it was a concerted assault on the freedom of the press to prevent embarrassment for future governments, which was only seen off by jury trials. In the mood of the times, the establishment, the blob, was itching to find journalists guilty, and that included judges. Judges are not immune from political influence, and in recent years, activist judges have increasingly become more political. Baroness Hale, who consistently voted against the last Conservative government in the House of Lords once she'd retired, showed off about her political position by wearing a ridiculous brooch when overruling ministers. The recent tendency to replace ministerial decision-making with judicial opinion has inevitably politicised the judiciary and reduced trust, as they seem to belong to a left-wing ascendancy. Against this background, appointing Sir Brian Leveson to inquire into reducing trial by jury is like asking Judge Jeffreys to report on the Monmouth Rebellion. He has little reason to love juries, as he was famously embarrassed by the acquittal of Ken Dodd when he was the lead prosecutor, and he showed in his appalling free speech undermining eponymous report into the press that he is no lover of our ancient liberties. So you see a hater of liberty to decide upon removing further liberties. Juries protect from an overmighty state, and judges are much less independent than 12 fellow citizens. Juries sometimes acquit against the evidence when they think the law itself is unjust. Judges do not do that. That is not their business. Judges claim to be uninfluenceable. But when the government wanted cases hurried up, as with those after the Southport riots, they fell over themselves to comply. Criminal prosecutions have become a feature of modern politics in allied, democratic, friendly countries. It was tried against Donald Trump and is being tried with Madame Le Pen. It could happen here, in which case the jury is our safeguard, as it proved itself to be in favour of freedom of speech against prosecutor Starmer a decade ago. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com, but I'm very pleased to be joined now by Paul Britton, founder of Britton & Time Solicitors. Paul, thank you very much for
having me,
coming in. It is very worrying that the answer to problems within the criminal justice system is let's restrict jury trials, which is the absolute bulwark of our freedom.
If that is the go-to, if that is the knee-jerk reaction, then yes, that's absolutely wrong. Because you have a right, as a defendant in this country, to be judged by your peers. That's one of the salient principles of criminal justice. And to take that away in favour of what we call swift justice. So swift justice is where you will go before a judge, the judge will hear the evidence and then go on to the sentencing. When some people say that the judges have no power in the Crown Court, it's because they don't determine guilt. The jury determine guilt, and it's only for the judge to then issue sentencing. But no, short answer to your question is, if they are going to that as a go-to, that's the wrong thing to do.
And this seems to be where the process is looking to go, to have an intermediate step somewhere above a magistrate's court, but below the full Crown Court, where you'll have a judge and two magistrates sitting together so that it'll be quicker, and that this is seen as being a way of dealing with the backlog cheaply and quickly.
So it will be introducing a third track. And actually, that's quite funny because in civil, we've actually just introduced a fourth track. But yes, to introduce a third one would be dangerous. To deal with cases expeditiously and to look at the backlog, you don't really need an all bells, all whistles inquiry to understand where the backlog is coming from. The tabloid headline is a once-in-a-generation review of the criminal justice system. It's over-egging the pudding. What the problem is since 2016, there are roughly 22% fewer junior criminal barristers coming through the ranks. Over the last 5 years, the number of what we used to call QCs, Queen's Counsel, they're now King's Counsel, has halved. And those King's Counsel would ordinarily become Crown Court judges. So we've got fewer junior barristers, fewer KCs, and fewer judges. That in the background of a decaying court system, court buildings. There are often times where I'm in the criminal courts and the courtrooms can't be used because the heating's not working. There's also a problem with the transport of prisoners. The Old Bailey, for example, sometimes it takes so long, the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, sometimes it takes so long for prisoners to arrive. They're not getting there till midday, 1 o'clock. They should have been there in the morning. It knocks on the list of cases that are going to be dealt with that day. The prisoner ends up being transported back to the prison that they came from and the case being relisted for another day.
But why does it take so long? Can't you have a system where you bring the prisoners in at 8 o'clock in the morning, you hold them in cells in the Old Bailey, and then they're ready for the beginning of the court's business?
That's the perfect answer. That's the perfect solution. There's just not enough resources. There are just not enough.
Is this... Of course, there is an argument the Conservatives in government didn't provide enough money, they cut back on legal aid, they didn't fund the criminal justice system properly, you then had COVID and got some backlogs. But when it's transporting prisoners, whether you get them there at 1 o'clock or you get them at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's surely organisational, not funding.
It is, but you can't really criticise when you look at the number of cases, you can't really criticise the last government because under that government, Crown Court cases came to an all-time low of around 30,000. They're now up near the 80,000s. COVID did have an impact, but it's continued after that. And I don't think you can put your finger on COVID or any one issue.
So we've gone
like
from
that.
30,000 Crown Court trials as a low to
cases in the system,
in the
Crown
system.
Court system.
So there are 80,000, but they're not treating 80,000 in a year. That's why we've got the listings in 2027 and 2028 for some cases.
Yes. So, I mean, that's a very good point. There are cases where people are not in custody, where they're out on bail, and the Crown Court are kicking their cases into the long grass for later on into, 2027, which is outrageous.
And the Crown Court doesn't seem to sit for very long hours. Now, people say there's a lot of preparation that has to be done, but isn't the system just sort of fundamentally inefficient? Dare I say it, aren't the judges just a little bit idle?
Well, it's like you and Nigel were just talking about 4-day working weeks, but could you imagine if the judiciary worked a 4-day working week, how many more cases that we would have then? You know, it's a 4-day working week isn't very... What if journalists worked a 4-day working week? So we're not going to have news on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday. You know, it doesn't work, and it wouldn't work in the justice system. In fact, judges have been sitting at weekends to try and get through cases. But when you've got... I mean, one of the reasons there's so many cases in the Crown Court at the moment is because they are taking... If you're on bail, they're taking a long time, so they stay in the system, so the figures are inflated. It doesn't mean that bad criminals, you know, people that have done serious wrongs, aren't come into justice quickly.
Because they're held on remand and there's a limit on how long people can be on remand before they're tried.
Well, there's roughly 90,000 people in prisons at the moment across this country, and there's about 3,000 vacant spaces at any one time. So there is not an unlimited number of prison cells. So if they are held on remand and we need to deal with them quickly, they are actually dealt with. They're not delayed. But if you're on bail, those sort of cases are heavily delayed.
And so what would you do other than limit jury trial to speed things up?
What would I do to speed up
to get through that backlog?
Well, you've got to look. It starts at the very beginning. You've got to pay people a reasonable salary. You know, one of the reasons why there are fewer criminal barristers is they get paid so poorly compared to other lawyers in other professions. You know, we joke that not all lawyers are born equal, and it's quite true. A criminal defence lawyer will get paid a lot less, you know, for example, £60,000-70,000 in central London when they're 10 years post-qualified, whereas a corporate commercial lawyer would be looking at six figures starting with a 3, you know, in a decent firm. So the other professions within law are more attractive.
And so it's money, ultimately.
So we should attract more junior barristers. We should eventually get more criminal judges, and we should be looking at the courtrooms to make sure they are available to be sat so that judges can sit and deal with cases, as well as getting prisoners in on time. I think those small changes would sort out this backlog.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. After the break, I'll be revealing why I'm supporting Labour for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
A Jaguar has ditched its growling big cat logo as part of what can only be described as a woke rebrand. The badge that has been used for decades, look at it, beautiful, on the bonnets of luxury cars has been swapped for a curved geometric J badge. They've also released a brand new advert, look at it, for their rebrand, which prompted Elon Musk to ask if the company actually sold cars. I thought this was a wind-up. It's not. It's true. Joining me now to discuss this is the motoring journalist Amanda Stratton. Amanda, what on earth is going on at Jaguar? The car of James Bond, Batman, Arthur Daley has gone off the scale woke. Please make me make sense of it.
The E-Type is an absolutely iconic car, and it's important that people remember that, in fact, in its heyday, Jaguar was an incredibly prestigious brand, more so really than other British brands like Aston Martin, for example. But, you know, people in the industry are left sort of scratching their heads because you need to do something bold, you need to do something that catches people's attention, but you also need to stay true to who you are and what you are, and I'm not sure that this is it.
Amanda, that could be an advert for anything. It could be cat food. It could be Karl Lagerfeld. It could be literally anything apart from a Jag. Well, I mean, honestly, I mean, OK, we're talking about it. So we are talking about it, but we're not talking about it for the right reasons, are we?
And I think if I was going to be speculative here, I would like to think that this is actually all part of a cunning plan to get everybody talking about it. Yeah. So when they do launch the first new car that we're going to see, which, you know, people have been waiting, as I say, since 2001.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about juries, and your view is very interesting because there's quite a lot of defence of removing juries. Andy says the courts are brimming. Juries get things wrong and judges are experts. Surely we need to compromise. Jeff says, surely this is the Tories' fault for underfunding the courts. And Andy, why are you so against Leveson? Without the inquiry, the tabloids ruined people's lives. Steve says Starmer has no love for jurors and would welcome no jury trials. Julie, if we lose jury trials, what next? And Aaron, abandoning jury trials is a betrayal of our justice system. Fix the backlog with proper funding, not by cutting corners. So clearly, there's a lot to discuss further on juries. Now it's time to explain why, for 15 minutes only, I'm supporting the Labour Party. The Prime Minister has made the government's home-building priority clear. Ultimately, people's needs must trump those of newts. The message is not an easy one, yet when faced with the risk of Britons being cold and poor, affordability must come first. It is a welcome surprise to see the Prime Minister, or at least his deputy, prioritise the condition of the people over the condition of the earthworms and agree to weaken our planning rules. So I'm joined now by my most intellectual panel, journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman and senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, Richard Johnson. Paul, let me come to you first, because as a constituency MP, as I was too, there is inevitably an element of NIMBYishness that one has to do to represent one's constituents. But the point that not all green belt is wonderful land is right, isn't it?
It's certainly right to build more houses. The question is how you go about it. My memory is when you were in government, you were supporting a quite different means of doing it, which was establishing big zones in which you could build more rather than trying to crank up the present system. So I think there's a question about how. I was the editor of Conservative Home, for what it's worth, for about 10 years. I was consistently in favour of building more houses. The question is how you do it. And I think the best means, which would bring back some of the radicalism of the past, is by building new towns, which Britain Remade, a lobby group, has called for this week. I think that would be a better way of doing it. I think the government's right to want to build more. I think the South East has got to take some, but I'm very suspicious of their methods, their targeting and the way they're doing the distribution.
But doesn't every NIMBY say that we need to build more, but I'm not sure how? And actually, this is simply doing an Alexander the Great and cutting the Gordian knot.
Yes, but the counter-argument to that would be, OK, the NIMBYs never ever want to build more, so let's simply just scrap the whole system and build everywhere. You've got to try and find out what the best means of doing the building is. For myself, I would rather see some new towns and build a lot more in a few places than a lot more in lots of places.
And Richard, a lot of talk about local government, and Labour's theoretically in favour of devolving to local government. But actually, local government's pretty useless, isn't it? And that's why it needs to be centralised.
I completely agree. The Labour Party used to be a party that took power seriously in Westminster and saw its purpose as achieving the national interest and operating for the national interest. And I think Labour's love-in with devolution has been rather perplexing. Not long before the election, Wes Streeting made some comment where he said the purpose of a Labour government is to win power to give it away. And I thought that's a rather curious statement, because it depends who you're giving power away to. If you're giving power away to people who do things that you don't agree with, then is that the purpose of a Labour government? So I like that it seems particularly Angela Rayner understands the purpose of power. I think maybe comes a little bit more from that older Labour tradition and understands driving through policy for the national interest.
And it's a really good point that there's a lot of greenbelt land. There's car parks, old industrial sites, scrub land, might as well be built on, that it's not all area of outstanding natural beauty, except, of course, in Somerset.
No, but what I think is important is that the houses that are built should be houses that are attractive, that I see a lot of estates that go up where and friends and family live in many of these new build houses that have already gone up where things go wrong straight away when you move in, that the windows are too small. And so I do think also not only should the government drive through volume, but should also insist on a certain degree of quality. And because when you build attractive housing, then people in the local area will be more supportive of it.
But this is where I don't think the government will get it right, because I think if you build attractive housing, people will buy it, and it doesn't need government regulation. But I'd be absolutely astonished if a Labour government were willing to give up the minutiae of planning.
Well, I think my understanding is they've actually dropped the building beautiful element. Yes. And I know all that because it's not my area, but I'm a senior fellow at Policy Exchange, the think tank, and it's been banging on about building beautiful for a while. And Angela Rayner sort of dropped that bit. So Labour's concentrating on just getting the houses built rather than what they look like.
Well, you see, I think if you free up the market, the house builders will build beautiful things because that's what people want. That's why Poundbury has got a premium, because the King has built things that are actually attractive.
You're making a sort of big thing of supporting the government, but it seems to me your vision of how it should be done is actually quite different, which is greatly liberalising the planning law, whereas they're using the central levers of government, as Richard said, to drive the building through.
But this is a very good start. You use the central levers of government, you practically agree to every appeal that comes onto your desk, say that if local authorities aren't cracking on with it, suddenly you get the supply of planning approvals coming through.
Yes, and I think this morning on the Today programme, Matthew Pennycook, the Housing Minister, was saying that he wants councils to work with the government. This is not entirely confrontational. And I think the view is that if the councils do work with the government and they're getting a bit more funding for planning officers and so on to give them capacity, then they will be able to shape that development in ways that's more attractive for the local area. But I think it's admirable of the government to say that if we feel that you're not pushing forward quickly enough, then we shall take action and we shall override your objections.
I mean, certainly the Conservatives have got to have some sort of answer to this in terms of building. If they don't like this, and I can see why they don't like the balance of where the housing is going to be or the means by which the government's going to drive it through, they have to have some sort of alternative if they're going to offer anything at all to young people at the next election, which is why I would use the central power of the state to build new towns and, as I say, build a lot in a few places rather than a lot in lots of places.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that's the heart of appealing to younger people. Well, this is not the only area where I'm supporting His Majesty's government. You may remember debanking, ESG and other examples of the corporate world going woke. Now the Business Secretary has finally stepped on the right side of the debate and voiced concern for activist groups, banks and insurance companies refusing to do business with defence firms. A strong Defence Secretary is essential, particularly in this dangerous time, and British firms should not face ridiculous virtue signalling obstacles. And Richard, this just is fantastic. The Labour woke-ish government is saying investing in defence, lending money to defence companies is good news.
This has been a good news week for people who have a more, what I might call, an Attleeist view of Labour government, both on what we just talked about, but also on defence. When the Attlee government was in power after the Second World War, this was not a government that was clutching its pearls over armament. And, of course, there's that famous line from the Foreign Secretary, Ernest Bevin, who says about the nuclear bomb, we've got to get one of these and put a Union Jack on it. And I think that this Labour government, partly by just, I think, the fact of being in power and understanding the challenges that are facing the country, have set aside some of the gesture politics of opposition and I think have become more serious in government.
And it's putting some pressure on the regulators, because I understand from a banker perspective that the FCA was all for debanking when Nigel Farage was debanked. Then it was a public scandal and they were suddenly all against debanking afterwards. And so actually it's making sure the regulator is sane.
And I think also it's very important that government gives the right signals, because part of what I think we've seen in this area is a great deal of over-caution and the banks feeling that they have to worry about these ESG agreements and so on. And I think if the government is giving them the breathing room and actually giving them a permission structure to say, actually, we want you to press ahead with this, then I think we will see some important change in behaviour, which will be good for the economy and for defence.
And it undermines some of this ridiculous ESG nonsense, which when I was an investment manager, I thought was failing one's fiduciary duty to clients.
Interesting question is what your average Labour backbench MP thinks about this, quote, ESG nonsense, as you've called it. So here you've Donald Trump, he's coming in, he's about to ask for a considerable increase in defence expenditure from European countries, including ours. Now, to my mind, Keir Starmer and John Healey are in a very, very difficult position because there's not a lot of money around. They would have to put some of it there. But what does your average Labour backbencher really think about this? About the arms trade, about spending more on defence? More money for defence would mean less money for something else, or more borrowing or higher taxes. And I'm not convinced myself the heart of the Labour Party is with what the Minister said this afternoon. But we will see.
But it's the question of having business involved and saying... Because the Bank of England periodically gives instructions. It gives instructions discouraging people lending to oil companies. If you're now saying that defence is a good thing to be engaged with, that must be positive.
Yes, but to what extent is the government going to be able to take the Labour Party with it? We'll have to see.
We'll have to see. Well, if I'm supporting the Labour Party, it may be that backbench Labour MPs are not so enthusiastic. Thank you to my panel. In a moment, the government has taken the decision to give even more of your money to a Palestinian aid agency linked to terrorism. It's a wonderful world.
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. Frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result, the frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most, and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about planning and defence, and the mailmogs have come in. Carl says, please consider the following. The average size of a UK household is 2.4 people. Net migration is currently 1 million per year. This sounds like a GCSE maths question. If this continues, it equates to 5 million over the next 5 years. This would require well over 2 million new houses just to house migrants. So no new housing for British citizens under current plans. Well, Carl, I think you've got a very good point. Dan, I don't agree with. We should not be building on green fields. The high street is dying, whether we like it or not, so repurposing empty shops could provide affordable homes for both buyers and renters without ruining our rapidly diminishing green belt. Next time you take an aeroplane anywhere, fly into Heathrow, just look out of the window and see quite how much green space there is. We're not running out of it as quickly as it sometimes seems. The Prime Minister has committed to handing over another £13 million of your money to UNRWA, the UN's Palestinian humanitarian organisation, despite evidence that 12 of its staff participated in the 7th October attack. The latest payment follows Foreign Secretary David Lammy's announcement of $21 million in July, when he resumed funding for the agency after the Conservatives paused it, following the allegations that its employees were linked to Hamas. 9 of the UN's aid agency staff were fired in August after an internal inquiry revealed they may have been involved in the Hamas-led assault that claimed 1,200 lives and left 251 people taken hostage. Well, my most intellectual panel is still with me, Paul Goodman, and the senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, Richard Johnson. Paul, they just shouldn't be giving out this money. It's not actually the amount. In the grand scheme of government expenditure, it's not huge. But this is one of the worst UN agencies, and the UN has some pretty terrible agencies.
The whole history of UNRWA is very peculiar, as it was set up after 1948 and the creation of Israel, very specifically to deal with Palestinian refugees. I think your viewers would think refugee agencies, that's people coming in from the outside, looking after people who are in desperate need. Actually, as I understand it, most of UNRWA, rather than being workers coming in from the outside, are local Palestinians, hence this difficulty with Hamas. So what I would like to know is what possible guarantees David Lammy has got, because I can't believe they're there, that would entail that he knows this wouldn't happen again.
Well, and how can you have guarantees? What guarantees can you be given to an organisation on the ground, employing local people, many of whom will have been sympathetic to Hamas?
I think one figure is they provide... One shouldn't be led into thinking they provide all the aid. One figure I've seen says they provide about half. Another I saw said they provide about 20%. So I prefer to see other agencies being scaled up rather than UNRWA doing the work.
That must be right, mustn't it, to try and work through other agencies and to recognise that this agency has been caught with people belonging to it for whom there is evidence, and we haven't had criminal trials, but there is evidence that even UNRWA has acted on, that they were supporting a terrorist organisation.
I'm sympathetic to the critique, but I do think that it's important to contextualise that UNRWA has about 30,000 employees. 99% of them are locally employed Palestinians. Most of UNRWA's work is schools. They run over 700 schools for Palestinians. And this is not to defend the fact that they had people on their payroll who were involved in the horrendous attacks on 7th October. But it's not like a lot of what we might view, as Paul was saying, about other aid agencies where they're not just merely coordinating aid that's coming in, they're actually running services, schools and hospitals and so on, and they're employing local people. It's actually become a bit of an employment scheme, a local employment scheme. And so in that context, you can possibly imagine how they might have among that 30,000 people, half a dozen of them who were involved in the attacks.
But these people are actually working for UNRWA who have been found to be associated. It's not people who are beneficiaries of their scheme. So it's more serious than that. I accept that a charitable organisation may find that one of its beneficiaries has done something criminal. That's something you couldn't necessarily guard against. But actually have people inside your organisation begins to indicate that some of the funding is going to be helping terrorism.
Well, yes, but it's quite a large employer. I mean, to put it in perspective, the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which coordinates all the other refugees around the world on behalf of the UN, was actually founded after UNRWA. They only have 20,000 employees who oversee the entire world. Mm-hmm. UNRWA has 30,000 based in the West Bank, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria. And in that sense, what we're looking at actually is almost a kind of a civil service organisation that the UN has set up and funded in the West Bank and Gaza. And there's many critiques to be made about that, both in terms of who they employ and maybe there's not been enough safeguards. And I think it's right that countries who volunteered to give money for this organisation can pull that money back if they don't feel it's been accounted for. But if it's not there, I do think that there at the moment isn't really capacity to fill the gap, particularly when it comes to the school system which it runs.
And is that a fair point? Do you just allow the gap to exist and say, look, this is a bad organisation, we will not fund it, something new needs to be set up, or indeed something needs to be done after the current troubles have ended.
So you go back to the question of how the government can know how many of the employees of this organisation are involved with Hamas. There's also a secondary point about the education role. I mean, this is a problem in the region as well. It's also been said to be a problem in Israel. There's, of course, needless to say, a problem with the textbooks that are used. And the argument is that UNRWA are presenting a very one-sided view to the people they teach of what the history of the area was. Now, you might also say that about some of the stuff that goes into schools in Israel, but the view of some people who've looked at it is that some of the stuff that goes into Palestinian textbook is particularly severe.
Right. Well, Paul and Richard, thank you very much. After the break, State of the Nation's Book Club returns in epic fashion. An heir to the Habsburg throne and author of Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World will be joining me.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
1 in 20 people are diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder across the UK.
Yes, Healthwatch has revealed that men are more likely to suffer from this than women. Did you know?
Triggers apparently include a decrease in daylight hours, which is certainly happening around about now. If you're leaving the office, it's dark. When you come home, it's dark, as well as the falling temperatures.
Yes, and both of those things happen a lot, don't they, here in Britain? So how can we combat the symptoms of seasonal affective disorder? Well, to discuss this, we're joined now by Dr. Andreas Fonseca, the founder and director of Thrive Mental Wellbeing. Really good to see you this morning, Doctor. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, there'll be lots of people watching and listening this morning and saying, what a load of rubbish. It's always been cold in this country. It's always been dark. What is seasonal affective disorder? Is it really a thing?
Well, it is a thing, and it's been known for quite some time. This is not new, really. It is a form of depression. That's what it is. And it's got specific characteristics that kind of differentiate it from other forms of depression. So the reason probably we're talking more about it is because it's basically people are more aware of it and they're recognizing it more. So before you used to be sort of just saying this person's got depression, now you have some specific things to look at that can differentiate it from other kinds of depression, which is quite useful because it's got some specific forms of treatment. So the things that are different about seasonal affective disorder are that for the diagnosis you need 2 years in which you only have episodes during either the late autumn or early winter. So that's when they start, and they fade away by late spring, summer. Early summer. So that's how it works. And you cannot have any episodes at any other time. So it has to be seasonal, specifically seasonal.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about UNRWA and you were sending in your mail mogs. And Dave says, can no one stop this government from giving taxpayer money away? I'm afraid I doubt it. And Arnold says, good evening, Sir Jacob. How surprising that is that we always find money to help other countries, but we are systematically short of cash for our own people. This should become a main issue. Well, I completely agree with that. I think there's a lot of misspending in our overseas aid budget. And Sam says it's outrageous that Labour is doubling down on funding UNRWA despite these serious allegations. Well, the last Conservative government stopped it, paused it, and the Americans have done the same. And I have to say, I agree. I think that's the approach we ought to be taking. But now it's time for the State of the Nation Book Club. Viewers may remember Archduke of Austria, Edward Habsburg, whose excellent book, The Habsburg Way, was published last year. Well, the Archduke has released a new book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World. A scion of one of the most famous families in history, His Excellency, the Archduke's book is a fascinating manual for successful marriage and family life, interspersed with examples from his illustrious family who dominated European politics for centuries. Pleasure to welcome Edward Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, Ambassador of Hungary to the Holy See, back to GB News with your second book on the subject of family, not on the Habsburgs this time, but on how to build a wholesome family in a broken world and advocating marriage and children. How receptive do you think people are to this traditional message?
Well, first of all, thank you for having read my book. I think that it's an important book for our times. I'm stating the obvious a lot. I'm saying things that were totally normal over the last centuries, even millennia. I think that people are, in a way, probably thankful for someone giving them a few hints how to build a wholesome family, because most people don't manage. You look around you, you have broken marriages, you have people living together, you have nobody having children. People never experience a wholesome, large family. And, but it's not their fault, because they never meet anybody who has many children. They never meet anybody who is married for decades and happily so, very rarely. So I thought I'd write a little book that people can buy and experience, and I'm trying to get across what a great and wonderful experience it is to have lots of children, to have a wholesome family, to be married for decades, how wonderful it is to be married for decades. And it's peppered with Habsburg examples, but it's really mostly my experience.
And you have 6 children, you've got 5 girls and 1 boy.
Yes, indeed.
And 1 grandchild and another on the way.
Yes.
So you have lived this example. But is it something that is practical in a way that people can live their lives, in terms of how can they afford to have so many children, the housing problem, should they be concerned about the environment and the resources that children use?
Yes, I know that even members of the British royal family sometimes said things like we should be mindful of climate and have less children. No, I believe that, look, we live in the best, wealthiest, safest, best medically assisted time ever in Western civilization. People are well, you can afford almost anything, but you can't afford children. It's absolutely ridiculous. Our ancestors had children when they had next to no money. It wasn't always easy, but it was normal. It was the conditio humana, was to have children as a family. And I believe that you have to make adjustments. That's why I strongly encourage couples, before they get even engaged, I've got a list of things that you should checklist, what you're looking for in the other person, to have a long and hard talk. Do we have the same idea of family? Because if both are ready to have a large family, this will have consequences. And I know, because I wasn't always an ambassador, when I had my many children, I was a scriptwriter. So it really means priorities, hashtag priorities. You have to decide having a lot of children will mean you won't always have the latest iPhone models. Not everybody can afford to have their own computer. You might have to have a beat-down, large, old, used car. You might not be able to afford an apartment downtown Manhattan or London, because you might have to go to a place where you can afford a house. These are all decisions. But you have to have these decisions to make them together before you even get engaged. Because if the other person is not along on the ride, there will be problems.
And do you have to have faith to want to have a large family? Is that an essential part of it because of the commitment that comes from the sacrament of marriage? Is that really the true building block of family life?
So as Hungarian ambassador, who is very proud of what his government is doing, and profiting, I have 6 children, financial incentives, tax help for families that want to have more children. I still believe that this can only get you so far. And that's why in my book, the first on my checklist, what you're looking for a Christian. Ideally, you're looking for a Catholic. I even encourage people to become Catholic because I believe that the Catholic Church has both the tool set for a long and happy marriage, but also the teaching and all the help you need as a couple to go on a long and very happy path together. So yes, I truly believe that faith is an indispensable ingredient. I believe you can be married without common faith. You can even be married without having a belief, but you can also climb Everest without oxygen. It's possible, but it's so much more difficult. If you have faith in common, you will get across every hurdle that comes your way.
But this is quite a controversial message in the secular world because you're preaching chastity and living within the teaching of the church, and that's not the modern way. The modern way is sexual liberalism and fornication.
Look around and see how many people look happy, how many experience a real happy marriage. What I strongly encourage in this book is don't go on one affair after the other. Don't have one relationship, break it off, have a new one, break it off. Because you're expected to do so. Because in school it's like normal. Everybody does it. And it's like you're young, you have to have fun. But the price you pay for that fun is that at some point you're not able to have a decades-long, happy, fulfilled marriage. Even without wanting to clobber you over the head with a Catholic teaching, chastity makes sense. But it's so much easier within the Catholic Church because we're human beings, we're sinful. And there's so many things that try to drag us apart. Our society today, from pornography via everything else, tries to drag couples apart. The Catholic teaching and confession are very helpful tools.
And so you recognise that though you're advocating chastity, people will fail, but through confession they can redeem themselves and put things back together again.
Yes. I believe, again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This was the Catholic way over centuries, and of course in my family in the Habsburg way, is isn't suddenly wrong since the 1960s. I don't exactly know why it should be. There is this idea that humanity has sort of transcended some sort of soil. They jumped across a hurdle, and now everything's different, and everything that always counted doesn't count anymore.
And one of the things that's very different is many more women are working in the workplace, and indeed the income is necessary to support the family. But again, you're saying something quite controversial in the modern world, that you think mothers primarily should be carers for their children.
Yes, I know that it's going to be very controversial, and one will believe that I want to drag women back to the kitchen and the children. But it's simply, if you look at children, you and I both have children, and we saw them grow up, and we experienced the first weeks and months. My father has a saying that I always thought was wrong until I had my own children. He said, the education of a child is finished at 3 years. It's incredibly provocative, but it's really true. Those first few years shape the worldview. Their ability to love, their way they see themselves, their faith, everything. Do you really want to hand those incredibly important years over to someone else while you go out and work? It's possible that you have no choice. It's possible that you cannot afford to have a family without that. But think hard what your motivation is. Are you working because you think you have to? Or is it the best you could do for your family? My claim in this book is you always have to ask yourself, what is the best for our family? It may be that the father stays at home. I'm not advocating at all costs that the mother has to be the carer at home. But I believe that this is the best for the children.
Archduke, Your Excellency, thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Well, that interview was so interesting that I went on far too long, and you can watch the rest of it on GB News' social media channels. The whole interview is available, my talking to Archduke Edward von Habsburg about his new book with really traditional views about marriage that had been so successful historically and for the distinguished Habsburg family. Well, next it's the great Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your programme this evening?
Well, I've got loads on tonight, Jacob. We've got an exclusive about a new way that human traffickers are getting people across the channel, which is very revealing. Ed Miliband is potentially in very big trouble as well. Can he explain some donations that he received? The NHS equates the dangers of cousin marriage with white British women in their mid-30s having babies. I think that's absolutely disgusting, to be perfectly honest with you, and awful. And Saudi Arabia, you know, why are we letting these Sharia regimes sports wash themselves? I think it has to stop.
All right, well, that as always sounds very interesting. And you might talk about Edward Miliband, the shortage of wind energy today, because we've been up at over 60% coming from gas because of a lack of wind on the continent. Anyway, that'll be after the weather. I'm back on Monday at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weekend weather in Somerset is so good. Just the best.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there. The weather is turning increasingly gloomy across the UK with a lot of cloud, some mist, hill fog and drizzle. There will be a few clearer spots over the next 24 hours, mostly central and northern parts of mainland Scotland, but a number of cloud breaks are possible elsewhere, particularly western parts of the country. But otherwise, it's just an extensive sheet of low cloud that will cover the hills and bring misty conditions with, in places, some light rain and drizzle, especially for western Scotland and through some southern and eastern parts of England and Wales. Temperatures then holding up under that blanket of cloud, 5 or 6 Celsius by dawn in many places, although under some clearer spells across parts of Scotland, dipping to -3 to -6 degrees. Frost-free, generally speaking, across southern areas, although a few cloud breaks possible towards the southwest, and where that happens, temperatures will dip to 1 or 2 Celsius. Likewise for Northern Ireland, some brighter spells to begin the day away from those areas where we're covered by a lot of low cloud, mist, hill fog and drizzle. The clearest spot there for northeast mainland Scotland, but otherwise Scotland certainly cloudier compared with recent mornings, and as a result the frost more limited, although it is a gloomy start for most and it doesn't cheer up much into the afternoon. In fact, there's little change. There's still outbreaks of light rain and drizzle through some southern and western parts, and some more persistent rain coming into the northwest of Scotland by the end of the day because of a weather front that will be approaching from the Atlantic. Generally 5 to 7 degrees in the afternoon. That weather front crosses the country on Saturday as a weakening feature, and then we're back to showers coming in from the northwest, interspersed by sunny spells, and it will be a bright day across some eastern parts whilst we keep cloudier skies in the west. And later in the weekend, increasingly wet for Scotland, drier elsewhere, but milder across the board.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB